They said the last teacher went missing, but no one ever found her car. No one even remembers her name anymore. And yet, every morning, her coffee cup still sits on the desk in room 13, half full, perpetually steaming, as if she had just stepped out for a moment and was frozen in time. It was the first clue, the one everyone ignored. It's the little things, the details that don't fit, that whisper the loudest warnings. This is not just a story about a missing teacher. It's a story about a place that consumes, a lesson that never ends, and a substitute who is always hiring. Crescent Valley High wasn't just a school, it was a monument to forgotten ambitions. Nestled in a town that time itself seemed to bypass, its gray, blocky buildings from the 1950s stood like tombstones. The air always carried the faint, metallic taste of rust from the lockers and the cloying scent of old paper that clung to your clothes like a ghost. Students moved through its halls in a somnambulant daze, their lives governed by the shrill, unpredictable scream of the PA system. Among the students were Tyler, whose defiant skepticism was a thin shield for a sharp mind; Emily, whose quiet, observant nature made her see the shifting shadows others ignored; and Leo, Tyler's best friend, who used humor as a defense mechanism against the pervasive gloom of the place. The heart of the school's whispered mythology was room 13. It was the only classroom without windows, a perfect square of stale air at the end of the east wing. Its door, a heavy slab of oak scarred with generations of initials, didn't just creak, it groaned, a long, low sound that seemed to originate from a place deeper than its hinges, as if the room itself were breathing. The school janitor, an old-timer named Frank who had seen principals come and go, would never change its light bulbs. "Let the dark be," he'd mutter, crossing himself with a hand that trembled slightly. The previous teacher, Miss Harrow, had been a vibrant young woman passionate about history. Her disappearance was a wound quickly bandaged over by the administration. "Moved away suddenly," was the official bloodless statement. But the students remembered. They remembered her classroom light staying on all night for weeks after she was gone, a lone, bright eye in the sleeping face of the school. They remembered the way her favorite pen, a deep blue fountain pen, had been left uncapped on her desk, the ink long since dried out. And they remembered the coffee cup. Always full, always steaming. The morning the announcement came, the students in homeroom barely looked up from their phones. Then the PA crackled, a sound like static and broken bones. "Students, please welcome your new substitute, Miss Verity." The name hung in the air, dissonant and strange. It sounded like it belonged in a black and white film, not a modern high school. A faint distortion, like a record skipping at a frequency just below hearing, followed the announcement. She arrived without the sound of footsteps. One moment the doorway to room 13 was empty, a rectangle of gloomy hallway. The next, she was simply there, occupying the space. Miss Verity was tall and unnaturally pale, her skin the color of old porcelain. Her features were sharp and precise, as if carved from marble. Her dark hair was pulled back into a bun so severe it seemed to stretch the skin at her temples. Her clothes, a charcoal gray skirt suit and a high-collared white blouse, were impeccably pressed but looked decades out of date, a relic from the 1950s. Her voice when she spoke was the most unsettling thing of all. "Good morning, class." It was soft, calm, and perfectly even, devoid of any human cadence or emotion. The greeting wasn't a salutation, it was a statement of fact. A wave of inexplicable dread washed over the room. No one answered. Not a single good morning was muttered. It wasn't out of disrespect, but because a primal instinct had seized every throat, tightening vocal cords into silence. She didn't take attendance. She didn't ask for names. She simply turned to the ancient blackboard and began to write. The chalk in her hand made no sound as it moved, a silent instrument tracing words onto the slate. The script was a looping, elegant cursive that seemed to write itself. "Today's lesson is history," she said, her back still to them. But the dates she wrote, 2047, 2058, 2065, they hadn't happened yet. Tyler, slouched in his chair, leaned over to Leo. "This is seriously weird," he whispered, the words barely audible. Miss Verity stopped writing. The silent chalk paused. The classroom temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Without turning around, her voice cut through the silence, clear and cold. "I can hear you, Tyler." He froze. His blood ran cold. He was sure. Absolutely sure. No one had said his name out loud. Not today. The piece of chalk in her hand cracked in half with a sound like a gunshot. From that moment, the world inside room 13 changed. The air grew thick and heavy, as if all the oxygen had been replaced with water. The flickering fluorescent light overhead began to hum a low, discordant tune. Students began to see things at the edge of their vision. A desk leg seeming to shift, a shadow cast from the wrong side of the room, a textbook page turning by itself. Miss Verity kept teaching, her voice now a calm, melodic lullaby that was somehow more terrifying than a scream. She spoke of the returning hour, of echoes of those who were never meant to leave, and of the architecture of time. Her words weren't lessons, they were incantations. At 9:15 the bell should have shattered the spell. It didn't. A collective unease turned to panic as phones were checked. Every screen, every clock on the wall was frozen. The minute hand on the analog clock by the door was motionless. Time had stopped inside room 13. Miss Verity smiled, a thin, bloodless movement of her lips. Good, now we can begin. She turned back to the board. This time she didn't write. She drew. A door. A tall, imposing black door with no handle, no keyhole, no seams. It was a void given form. Every school has one, she said, her voice a whisper that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The door that shouldn't be opened. She let the silence stretch, letting the image burn into their minds. Would anyone like to see it? No one spoke. No one breathed. But as if in answer to her question, the back wall of the classroom, where the world history bulletin board had been, began to shift. The colorful maps and student essays dissolved like mist, and in their place, the drawn door became real. It was there, a slab of absolute blackness that seemed to absorb the light around it. It pulsed faintly, rhythmically, like a sleeping heart. When Miss Verity walked towards it, her heels made no sound on the linoleum. Instead, they produced a soft, whispering noise, like pages of an ancient book being turned. And as she passed the rows of desks, a second shadow appeared behind each student, a distorted, stretched doppelganger that mimicked their frozen postures of fear. The black door stood, an impossible monolith. Miss Verity ran a pale hand over its surface. Some doors don't open with keys, she murmured. They open with attention. The students were statues, trapped in a nightmare. The air was so thick it was hard to draw breath. It was then that a folded note appeared on Emily's desk. It wasn't passed. It didn't fall. It simply materialized from the stagnant air. With trembling fingers, she unfolded it. The message was brief, written in the same looping cursive as the board. Do not look at her reflection. But the warning came too late. Curiosity, that fatal human flaw, had already taken root. Emily, seeking any anchor to reality, glanced at the wall beside her. A window had appeared there, a clean, clear pane looking out onto the hallway. It hadn't been there before. Hesitantly, she leaned closer. Her own reflection looked back, pale, frightened, normal. Then her reflection blinked. But Emily hadn't. A cold spike of terror drove through her. Her reflection then smiled, a wide, grotesque grin that stretched far beyond the limits of a human face, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. And in the reflection, standing behind her smiling doppelganger, was Miss Verity. In the real room, Miss Verity was standing motionless by the black door. But in the reflection, she was gliding silently, swiftly, directly toward Emily's shoulder. Emily tried to scream, but only a choked gasp escaped. At the same moment, Tyler, galvanized by a surge of adrenaline, tried to run. "We have to get out," he yelled, his voice strangled. He shoved his desk aside and bolted for the classroom door, but his body moved as if through syrup. His frantic sprint, barely a slow-motion lurch. As he reached for the doorknob, the black door Miss Verity had drawn began to open. It didn't swing on hinges. It peeled back, like a layer of reality being torn away. The darkness behind it wasn't empty. It was a swirling, chaotic vortex of shadows, and within it, human-like shapes twitched and jerked, their movements unnatural and broken, like marionettes with their strings cut. From the depths of that darkness, a long, pale hand composed of smoke and whispers shot out, its fingers elongating, reaching for Tyler. Miss Verity watched, her smile serene. "Attendance," she murmured, the word dripping with a terrible finality, "is now complete." The darkness surged forward, not as a wave, but as a sentient fog. It didn't engulf the students, it unmade them. One by one, their forms dissolved into the static, their terrified screams swallowed by the humming silence. Leo, Emily, Tyler, their outlines flickered and were gone, pulled into the swirling chaos behind the door. The last thing Tyler saw was Miss Verity's calm face, and the last thing he heard was her voice, soft as a graveside whisper. Then, silence. The bell rang, sharp and normal. It was morning again. The classroom was empty, perfectly, utterly empty. Not a desk, not a book, not a scrap of paper remained. The black door was gone, leaving behind a blank, beige wall. The air was stale and thick with dust. The janitor, Frank, found the room unlocked. On the floor, lying as if it had grown there, was a single sneaker, one of Tyler's, melted halfway into the tile, the rubber and laces fused with the linoleum in an impossible amalgamation. Yet, Miss Verity still came to work. Every morning at 8 sharp, witnesses would see her through the glass of the main doors, heels clicking with purpose down the abandoned hall towards the non-existent room 13. She would stop at the blank wall, produce an old-fashioned key from her pocket, unlock nothing, step into nothing, and close nothing behind her. And every day at 3 p.m., a faint, melodic humming would echo through the empty halls. The police were called. The school was searched. They found nothing. But the security footage told a different story. On the digital recording, Miss Verity appeared only in a handful of fragmented frames, a ghost in the machine, and in every single frame, her pale, gray eyes were looking directly, knowingly, into the camera. 3 days later, Tyler came back. He was found sitting at a desk that had magically reappeared in the empty room, his hands folded neatly. He didn't speak. He didn't blink. He was a hollow shell. When the school nurse shined a penlight into his eyes, she stumbled back in horror. In both pupils, reflected in the tiny black apertures, was the perfect, unmistakable shape of a door. He whispered one phrase before collapsing into a catatonic state that doctors could not explain. "She's teaching them still." The town tried to move on. Crescent Valley High was shuttered, locked behind rusted gates. A new, bright, modern school was built down the street, but the past refused to die. A retired custodian, Frank, left a note to be opened after his death. It read, "She doesn't kill them, she collects them. They're still in class." The legend became internet fodder. The Room 13 challenge drew thrill-seeking teens. One group, live streaming their break-in, captured the final, terrifying truth before their feed dissolved into permanent static. Their camera showed desks lining themselves up, and in the background of every shot, the faint outline of a tall woman with a severe bun, watching. The video was archived, but it kept reappearing online, a digital ghost. Paused at the right moment, viewers could see the faces of the missing students from decades past, their expressions eternally terrified, peering out from the static. And at the very end of the corrupted file, a pale hand writes 3 words on a dusty desk: "Class still continues." The cycle was eternal. The new school, despite its modern design, had a mysterious Room 13 on its blueprints that no architect claimed. On its first day, the PA system crackled to life on its own. "Students, please welcome your new substitute, Miss Verity." No one knows what she is. A ghost? A dimensional parasite? A concept given form? Perhaps she is the lesson itself, an eternal echo of consequence, a substitute for the void left by those who vanish. The sound of silent chalk on a phantom board echoes in the minds of those who listen too closely in the quiet of the night. That was the story of the substitute teacher. Tell me in the comments, what would you do if you saw your name on her attendance sheet? What's the scariest teacher encounter you've ever had? This story chilled you to the bone, didn't it? If you dare to hear what happens when the next class begins, you need to subscribe. Don't wait until you hear the sound of her chalk writing your name. Let us know your theories. Is Miss Verity a ghost or something else entirely? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Smash that like button if you enjoyed this eerie tale and hit the notification bell so you never miss a lesson. I mean, a story.